Hey, again, good morning to you, those of you in the room, those of you joining online. Thanks tons for being a part of today. Happy Father's Day to you. And I know today comes with all sorts of mixed deals, right? There's all sorts of good and excitement and good things happening. And for some of you, for some of us, we also think about things and people we've lost on days like today, and the memory goes down that road a little bit. And for some, those were losses of great things. And so there's all sorts of celebration, and the emotion is like kind of a good grief. For some of us, those were losses of tragic things and things that were not as though they could have been. And so it's a whole different kind of grief. Some of you in the room, you're guys, and you're not a dad, or you're not a dad yet, or whatever that might be. And I just want to say to you, at the very front side, please don't underestimate the power of your influence and the power of your influence outside of your own family. Some of my earliest morning texts, and this is true every Father's Day for me, but some of my earliest morning texts this morning went to guys who are not my dad, but have very much been father-like figures and investors in my life over the course of lots and lots of years now, all the way back to ninth grade for one of them when I was in ninth grade. And some of them before Eric and I were even married, and some of them, they just very uniquely have influenced how I am a dad. And so just don't underestimate your influence. Don't overlook it. Don't minimize your influence way outside your family, your circle of influence. If you'll just have 1% intentionality, your circle of influence will be better because you're in it. It'll be better because your life is in their life. And so we get to celebrate a lot of those things today. And I want to talk uniquely today, honestly, just to men. And so what I want to say to you in the room that are gals, take really good notes today and look for opportunities to use this to encourage men in your life, not leverage things against them in the future, okay? So whatever that's worth for you, okay? And whether you're a guy in the room and you're 10 or you're 110, let's just have some conversation. For the next few minutes, let's have some conversation. I want you to just for a minute think about something in which you absolutely had dogged determination to insist something was going to be a certain way. You insisted you were not going to do something. You insisted you were going to do something. You insisted you were going to be treated a certain way. You insisted you were gonna hold true to your story. Maybe you were being accused of something you actually didn't do. Maybe your parents at some point in life weren't really believing you, and yet you were telling the truth. And so you drew a line in the sand, even at what felt like great risk, and you just insisted, no, this I am telling the truth. You could have been on the wrong side of that, and you insisted to keep up your lie, and that happens too, right? You can determine which one of those is probably wiser, but right? But there was this moment or this period of time where you just insisted, I will not be taken advantage of in that way anymore, or I will be an encouragement. I will make a plan for our future. Or I'm insisting to my own insides that I will become a person who's open to spontaneity. There's all sorts of different components, pieces, elements of life in which we get to this point where we just insist something is going to happen or something is not going to happen, or we are going to believe something or say something or do or respond to something. And this morning, I want to invite you back to where we started last week, Psalm chapter 3, towards the middle of your Bible. If you've got a Bible, open this up or unlock a device and get there for the next couple of minutes. Psalm chapter 3, and here's where we are. We're listening in, and we're kind of jumping into the story of a guy named David who wrote this. And David is just a guy. He's a guy who was one of many kids, many sons in his family, overlooked by his dad at a couple key moments in life, verbally disregarded and even put down by his brothers, a little bit beyond just normal sibling rivalry. It got into like sibling jealousy and some weirdness there. And he's a really good shepherd. He kills lions and bears, and so he's pretty tough. Like, I don't know what makes you feel tough, but he's pretty tough. He's killing lions and bears to protect sheep. He's living in the wilderness. He's doing it. He becomes an incredible soldier, kills a giant that the rest of his nation, the rest of the army is being freaked out by all the time. David just walks up and kills him. He becomes a king, and all sorts of convolution and challenges with what it takes to be a leader. And he gets married. He has kids. He experiences loss. David, he's just a guy with this really diverse set of life experiences. And David writes a lot of what we have in the Psalms, and a lot of them are characterized by this thing called lament. This really deep, passionate grief or sorrow, where life just hurts. And you can picture David's life like him lamenting as a kid. He's just a kid, and he's kind of overlooked on his dad on occasion. His brothers don't treat him right. He gets the least of the chores because he's the youngest. I mean, you can imagine, don't just think about the dramatic. David in his everyday life had moments where the grief and sorrow are remarkably real and tangible. In verses 1 and 2 of this psalm, there's only 12 sentences that combine 8 verses, just 12 simple, short sentences in there. In the first couple, David plays out this experience of lamenting, this really deep, passionate grief and sorrow. And we left it last week very intentionally with no bow on it. We just said, look, sometimes we just have to acknowledge that it's okay and even healthy to live in the lament. To acknowledge loss is loss, and grief is grief. And that the most courageous thing to do is acknowledge it, and the weakest thing to do is deny it. Remember, we're talking about a shepherd that killed lions and bears, and a warrior that killed giants, and a king who led a nation, and he's got the courage and the strength to admit when he laments. Right? I mean, if he can do it, I'm like, okay, I could probably do that. It's not a sign of his weakness, it's a sign of his strength. It's not a sign of his fear, it's a sign of his courage. We talked about that even Jesus had moments of lamenting, very visible moments of lamenting. And then verse 3, this next sentence in David's really his journal entry and this writing, this thing that in parts some people would end up singing as part of a prayer of lament. He begins to shift the posture just a little bit. Let's check this out. Verse 3, Psalm 3, starting in verse 3. This is what he says. After people have pushed against him, after people have said God won't rescue him, he says, but you, Lord, as bad as this is, as upside down as my life is, as deep and agonizing as the grief and sorrow are, but you, Lord, you are a shield around me. You are my glory. You are the one who lifts my head high. And so I do call out to the Lord. And he actually does answer me. Now, again, here's the context. David writes this in a moment of great family turmoil. There's been some crisis in David's family, and as the dad, David actually didn't handle it the greatest. Again, he's just a guy. He's just human. He's got a lot of wins, but he's got a lot of losses. And he didn't handle it real great. Made some mistakes. I like that. I can identify with that. I can identify with David's mistakes more than I can identify with the fact that he killed lions and bears. Okay? Some of you can identify with the fact that he killed lions and bears. I can't, right? But he's got these losses too. And so in the middle of that loss, parenting loss, this really not great decisions, he gets this really extreme reaction, and one of his sons, Absalom, is now trying to kill him. That's how bad the family dysfunction became. That David's actually running for his own life from his own son. Can you imagine that Thanksgiving dinner? I mean, it is broken, friends. And so here's David's prayer, and David he laments it, and then he goes back to it. He says, but you, Lord, you are my shield. You are my glory. You are the one who lifts my head. And I cry out to you, and you actually answer me. And what David is starting to do while he's acknowledging his lament, while he's owning it, while he's living in it, is he is starting to insist to his soul and to his mind. He's starting to insist to his inner beings, the place of the lament, starting to insist to himself to remember some things that are constant about his God. Look, soul, we are going to get, this is awful and we are in it, and there is no denying it, but we are going to get back. We are going to this place. We are going to remember that there is a God who answers me, and there is a God who does not want to just lament for me, but wants to lament with me. And while he does, he is still this shield that surrounds me, this glory for me, and this one who will lift my head. So let's just play those out for a minute. David first gets into this pocket where he says, okay, I'm going to insist that my soul and my mind remember that God is a shield that surrounds me. God is a shield that absolutely surrounds me all of the way around me. And you can look at different points in history where you can read about armies and soldiers, and one of the things they would cling to most is the shield. It was like one of these greatest elements of protection, right? How can I defend myself? I will cling at all costs to the shield. If I lose everything else, if I can keep my shield, I've got a fighting chance to protect myself. And David's like, God, you're a shield that absolutely, though, surrounds me. We've got a 360 thing here going on. A lot of years ago, we were in this children's museum, and there was this little metal disc on the floor, and you could step onto the disc and get in this little circle, and you could bend down, and you could grab hold of this little metal ring, and if you pulled up the metal ring just slow enough, what began to come up with the ring was this bubble. You know, like when you blow a bubble, that kind of bubble. You'd have to go real slow, and you just pull this thing up, and you could just keep stretching this thing out. And if you were really careful and you did it just slow enough and smooth enough, you could get to the fact where you were completely surrounded by this bubble. And you could see everybody out around you, but they have that weird, bubbly blur. You know what I'm talking about? It just looks a little bit, yeah, that was that. But you'd be completely surrounded. It's a really good picture of what David is insisting his soul remember in this moment. Hey, God, this is everything around me. This is awful. I don't actually know which direction Absalom's coming from. I don't actually know if I can outlast him. I don't actually know who I can trust and who I can't. I don't actually know how to respond to the failures that I've made. I don't actually know fully how to respond. I don't want to take the life of my son, but I'm on this run. I don't really know what I'm going to do. But hey, soul, in the middle of this lament, which is awful, we are going to remember that there is still this God that is this shield, that if we'll grab a hold and we'll just hang on and we'll be real intentional, we'll get to remember that he is this shield all the way around us. I can still see Absalom, and I can still see the challenge that I'm in. I can still see my past and what I've done to contribute to this mess. But I am surrounded. And really, here's the thing. Part of the reason that David is insisting on certain things in his soul in the middle of this lament is because lament is really healthy, and lament comes with great risk. The lament is both at the same time healing and it is a fight. You see, because in the lament, in our openness of our own grief and sorrow, we make ourselves really available to how God might want to heal. And in the lament, God will always be moving to use it for good. God will always be moving to somehow bring good out of the lament, out of whatever costs us to lament. And next week, we'll talk in really some shocking ways about how he does it. Ways that most of us completely disregard, and honestly, culture has taught us to completely disregard. But God's always trying to use it to somehow, God's just a redeemer. He's always trying to even loss, while he grieves it with us, he's saying, okay, I can still do something good there. But at the same time, the enemy really is trying to use it to destroy you. The enemy is trying to chisel away at your identity and who you are and how God sees you and how you relate to God and how God would want to help and how God would want to rescue. Trying to chisel away at how you believe about who you believe you are in Jesus and because of Jesus and because of his work. So while God is fighting to use it for good, the enemy is fighting to use it to destroy your life. There's always two opposing plans for your life. And so David's like, wait. I just know in the middle of the lament, it is healthy for me, but if I'm not careful, I'm really vulnerable. And so I remember that God is like this complete shield around me. And if I will just be intentional, I will just stay with him and I will cling to this spot. He is a shield all the way around me. I don't know where every dose of discouragement is going to come from. I don't know where every attack is going to come from. I don't know where every lack of self-confidence is going to come from. I don't know where every piece of guilt is going to come from. I don't know where every element of arrogance is going to come from or unnecessary pride. But what I know is that it doesn't matter where it comes from. I'm actually surrounded. Here's the other beauty of being surrounded. Is when we're in a time of lament, when we've got the great loss, the great sorrow, whether it's because of something we did or something else somebody else did or just life in general, man, it can get really lonely really fast. And one of the ways the enemy would love to destroy is always by always creating exaggerated senses of isolation. And David insisting to his soul and his mind, no, we're going to remember that we are surrounded by this God. We have a shield all the way around us. It is part of how God defeats the enemy's isolation. It is part of how God reminds us, you're actually never completely alone. You're never completely alone. You may have a really hard time finding another human that has experienced what you are experiencing or have experienced, and yet you are never fully alone. Just think about David for a second. He's running from his own family. Look, it's bad enough if your family relationship is fractured and you don't fully trust one another or you don't really talk. I mean, those are awful enough and worth lifetimes of grief. Being hunted by your own family because they insist on killing you could make you feel really alone. Who's with you in that? And so David just goes back to this basic, yep, I am lamenting, and I'm not afraid to lament, but I will insist to my soul that we remember that God surrounds me. And that also that God is my glory, and God's glory is this strength, it's this really helpful sort of weight, this balancing measure in our life. And David then begins to insist to his soul that God is the glory that grounds me. God's the glory that holds me with some level of stability. When everything around me feels like it's knocking me off balance and nothing feels as stable, David's literally, not just figuratively, literally been uprooted from his home, literally been uprooted from his routine, literally been uprooted from everything that he knew is normal to go on the run. Literally everything that David would have said he held value in has been rattled. None of that is stable anymore. The new terrain is completely unfamiliar. And so in the middle of that, he begins to insist to his soul, we will remember That God is the glory that surrounds us, gives us some sort of firm footing, will lock us in, will give us some kind of balance, will help us keep our equilibrium when everything is coming at us from new and different directions. When we've never seen this type of challenge before, we've never had to carry this weight of success before, and it's coming with all sorts of new and rising pressure, we will still insist that our soul remember that God is the glory that grounds us. Which in so many ways protects us. It's God giving us this gift, right, of defeating total uprootedness. Total uprootedness. Now hear me on this. Listen. It's God defeating total uprootedness. The mere fact that we are lamenting something means there is something that's been uprooted. Something's not the same anymore. Something or someone we loved is no longer present. Something we thought we could count on is no longer true. A level we were very comfortable living at, a level of responsibility we were very comfortable carrying, has been elevated to all new sorts of pressure, and we're actually lamenting the new pressure because we don't exactly know what to do with it yet. So some things have been uprooted. Listen, when we experience great loss, so much changes. To deny that and to say everything is the same would be naive and deceptive to ourselves. Where there's loss, there is uprootedness. David's not denying that. But what he's saying is, look, I can't count on one thing that is constant in my life. I can count on one dependable, true as a clock, same as the sun, constant in my life. And that is the fact that God is the glory that grounds me. When everything else has knocked me off base, when everything else has shifted the ground which I walk, when everything else has altered how I think and what I process, when everything else has become a new emotion I'm trying to have to sort out, and a new way of living I'm having to try and carry, when all of that is happening, I will insist to my soul that God is still the glory that grounds me. There is something still stable in me. Even when I'm lamenting to the point that I've got really big questions for God, and I've even got some anger with God, and I've got some frustration, and so many of the Psalms of lament have that. God, where are you? What are you doing? How dare you? How could you? Right? And David's not above that. David wrote a bunch of those. And even in the middle of that, even in the middle of his most anger-filled questions towards God, he says, Saul, I'm just going to insist that even in the middle of that, what you remember is that it's not just that God surrounds you in a neat and warm and fuzzy way, but he is the God who grounds you. His glory grounds you. It gives you some stability when everything else is in upheaval. And even on some level, when little parts of your faith are in upheaval, because the lament is so deep and it's so raw, that even in that, God is the glory that grounds me. He is the God that surrounds, and it defeats so much of this isolation we can often feel in the moment. He is the God of glory who grounds us, which pushes back and defeats this sense of total uprootedness. There is something still rooted. And then he says that, and at the same time, like God's the lifter of my head. God's the one who lifts my head. Now just let's go somewhere here for a minute. Just come with me and try and picture yourself walking into a cave in David's world in this time. And David is on the run from his own son who's trying to kill him. And David has found a cave in which he could hide and maybe try and catch his breath a little bit, maybe formulate his next step. And try and imagine what the posture of David might have been. How might you have found David? Carrying and living with deep lament, some of it caused by himself and some of it caused by others, on the run. And I wonder if we would find David tucked into the back corner of a cave somewhere, sitting down, leaning forward with his head just hanging. You know that head hanging piece when you're not exactly sure how to sort out where you really are and what your part really is and why this has happened to you? And it's hard to formulate a clear thought, let alone formulate a clear plan. And imagine that David starts to maybe think through this psalm from this posture. With his head tucked, not just because he's tired, but because he's unsure. He's unsure of what he's really worth. And so out of it, he has the wherewithal to insist to his soul to remember that God does not want to simply lament for him. God wants to lament with him. And when God laments with him, God becomes the only one who can actually lift David's head again. Do you know what's true about somebody who actually can lift your head? It means they have to get close enough that when they actually lift your head, one of the first things you're going to see is their eyes looking at your eyes. It's a face-to-face moment David's recalling and experiencing, and that David is insisting can be true. When he says, God is the one who lifts my head and affirms me. God lives. We just acknowledge that it's easy in the moment of lament to wonder, am I seen? Am I still worthy? How did I get here? What is my part? And to sometimes grapple with, why can't I get out? I know while I'm here, but why can't I get out of this mode? And David insists to his soul, you will not force your way out. But there is a God who will come and lift your head. And when he lifts your head and you look at him face to face, it's when you get reminded, you have incredible significance to me. You still have great worth and great value. I came to you in the cave because you're still worth something. In fact, God uses the lifting of a head to defeat the temptation to settle into unworthiness. Man, it's easy to feel. Man, it's just easy. And then it's easy to cover it up with all sorts of masked, weird expressions of pride or arrogance or independence. And David had justification for all of those. Again, he'd killed lions and bears and giants, right? I mean, if anybody had reason, David did. But I wonder if we actually find him in the cave, sitting down, head just hanging, feeling just not good enough. Like not a good enough dad, not a good enough leader, not a good enough follower of God, not a good enough player, not a good enough student, not a good enough husband, not a good enough teammate, not a good enough owner, not a good enough worker. And God walks in and lifts his head. And David is insisting to his soul and to his mind that we remember that there's only one person that's really going to lift your head in that. There's only one person that's going to lift your head in a way that instantaneously can remind you of just how worthy and valuable you are, only because the one who did the lifting said so. That's the only reason. You didn't say so. You don't really get to be the first to say so. What would it be like if today, in our lamenting, in our loss, in our grief, in our frustration, in our disappointment with the world or others or ourselves, our frustration with God, our disillusionment with the church, our disappointment in ourselves and what we've done and how we performed at something or how hard we've worked at something or not worked, what would it be like if we just today, if we became people who insisted to our soul, there is still a God who would lift my head because he thinks I'm worth something, because he thinks I'm significant, even if others are trying to kill me. If I play it out a little bit, it's not very hard for me, and it's probably not very hard for you, to see points in your life or even places in your life right now where because of loss or because of grief or because of your actions or somebody else's or just the brokenness of the world, where you can carry some lingering senses of isolation or uprootedness or worth and value. I talked a little bit again last week just about the fact that, again, as an adult, Eric and I were married when my dad took his own life, but my dad left when I was around 1. And I was really fortunate. I mentioned this to you a little bit. I've been very, very fortunate to have a lot of people step in and fill father-shaped roles in my life. Lots of them. Some inside my family and some outside. But you still have to navigate what's lost. Right? Something replaced does not necessarily remove the necessity of navigating what it replaced and the loss of what it replaced. And probably in ways that I don't even understand or fully comprehend, sometimes that reality of a dad who bails a few significant times can feel isolating. And it can lead to even being around lots of people, you can feel isolation because grief and loss are that real and can be that debilitating. And again, remember, there's an enemy with a plan to destroy, and he will use things like grief and loss. And some of you, your dad is gone, your dad is still here, your parent is still present and living, whatever that is, and yet you can still feel isolated because of how broken the relationship is and because you grieve not just how bad it was, but you grieve what it could have been. And what does that actually mean? And it does feel like moments of uprootedness and nothing is stable. And there's weird dynamics of trying to learn how to trust and who to trust. And it's weird dynamics of trying to learn that. And candidly, in some ways that I haven't even always known, I've had to try and learn. But it becomes part of the story. It becomes part of the living lament of differing degrees of passion and sorrow and grief. And yet in the middle of that, there is this constant God that keeps grounding, that keeps being this one who would bring his glory to ground and stabilize. And there's this reality that when somebody who should have spoken and breathed value to your life and conveyed value to your life, and when they don't, no matter how big or small the person could or should have been in your life, whether it was a friendship or a family dynamic or a parenting deal or a boss deal or a coach deal or a friend, it doesn't really matter. When that gets lost, when there is a loss of what was or loss of what could and should have been, it's easy to find yourself in the cave, head hanging low, while the rest of your life looks great. See, here's what I know about you, because I know it about my own life, and because I know that we're just all human, is that lots of you even are sitting here today, and everything looks really good, and 99% of life is good. But when you're honest, there is a 1% or more that is an area of lament and grief, and it leaves you with your head hanging low, because you do wonder, what does that say about me? What does that make me think about me? What does that actually mean? If I'm just being very honest with you, I've spent most of my adult life trying to learn how to be a good receiver of love. So I have to remind my soul, I have to insist to my soul and my mind that we remember there is a God that surrounds and defeats the isolation. There is a God whose glory grounds and defeats the total uprootedness in life. And there is a God whose very gentle but strong hand lifts my head and defeats this sense of unworthiness and insignificance. You see, lamenting is real, and it is passionate, and it is a fight. It's a huge fight. And I want to read just a paragraph to you that a little bit paints the picture of the fight. And then I want to just invite us into a next step. And again, let me come back to those of us in the room that are men, whether you're 10 or 110. Just say, look, there's a move for us today. You are not the one person in the entire world that has lived your life without something to lament. Let me just give you some permission. You have not lived your life without something to lament. And you probably have something you're lamenting now, even if it's a constant, low-level lament. But there's a fight in that lament. You got to be aware. Let me just read this. See, we'll put this on the screen too, but here's what it says. Lamenting is real, it's courageous, and it's healthy. And while God laments with you and is tirelessly working to use it for good, the enemy really is fiercely trying to use it to destroy you. So insist to your soul what is constant about God. He is the shield that surrounds, the glory that grounds, and the hand that lifts. That is the literal, actual fight we fight in the lament. To keep insisting to our soul, to grab a hold of and lean on what is constant about God. So here's what we're going to do today. We're just going to take a couple minutes, and we're going to give God some room to remind us, in essence, who we are, so we can keep insisting to our soul. We're going to give God some room to express himself as the one who surrounds, the one who grounds, and the one who lifts and affirms. In order to do that, if you're here in the room, I just want to invite you to stand with me, and our team's going to come back, and we're just going to take a moment. Just go ahead and stand. And men, we're going to offer prayer time. There's going to be 3 men prayer partners in the back, and you can kind of see them at lit tables there. And if you're one of those people praying today, go ahead and get to a table. And here's the thing. We're just going to offer a time. And ladies, hear me on this. I know you have very real laments. But today, just uniquely, we're going to create some space for our men to go we're just, and men, I'm kind of nudging you. If you could feel my hand in the small of your back right now, it's there. That's me, okay? It's probably the Holy Spirit, but if not, it's me, okay? And we're just going to go allow ourselves to be prayed for. And you don't have to tell everything you're lamenting. You don't have to say anything. If you just go stand there, they're just going to pray for you. And I encourage you, if you're here with a brother or you're here with a son, you're here with a whatever, just go together. Just go together. Go as a group. Let there be some strength in numbers. Because it is a very real thing. And it is a courageous thing. But what better way today than just, okay, God, there's all sorts of things I've lamented in my life and probably am lamenting now. There's all sorts of losses and successes I'm trying to figure out how to carry, and failures I'm trying to figure out what to do with, and misses and missed opportunities, pain from other people, pain from myself. Man, the list is endless. God, if I could just get a little help reminding my soul today of who I am and that I have this authority in you to insist that my soul remember that you're the God that surrounds, and the God that grounds, and the God that lifts and affirms. So I'm going to pray for us just briefly, and then the time is going to be yours. And men, I just want to invite you to move. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to go. In fact, I will beat most of you to one of these prayer partners, okay? It will be a mini race, and I will win, okay? Because I live there. Just like on some level you live there. No shame, all courage. So Jesus, would you help us in the next couple of moments to really experience, maybe in a renewed way or in a very fresh way, that you even now, regardless of how big or small the lament feels, no matter how big or small the situation might feel that is causing the lament, you are eager to express your surrounding of us. You are eager to just remind us that you are the one that can ground us. You can be sometimes the singular source of stability, and you are the God that even today, while we've got some good fronts going, while we've got some good image management going, while we got some good toughness points, you are the God that can lift our head and affirm our value and affirm your desire for us and your love and passion for us. So we just make ourselves real available to you in these moments. In Jesus' name. Church, men, the time is yours. Let's go.